By the 1760s, Boston had become one of the most important cities in British North America, a crowded port shaped by trade, power, and growing tension. Within a single generation, the city would be pulled through revolution, scarred by conflict, and rebuilt as part of a new nation. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps, and engravings to life, shifting perspective, changing camera angles, and moving through scenes in ways their original artists never could. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to step into it, to walk the streets of old Boston, to see what once stood here, and to imagine what it may have felt like to live on the edge of something unknown. And if you stay until the end, we'll return to these same locations today, comparing what time has erased and what still remains. Before we step into 18th century Boston, it helps to understand how this story began. This painting depicts the arrival of the Winthrop fleet in New England in 1630. Led by John Winthrop, these ships carried settlers to the Massachusetts Bay, laying the foundations for what would soon become Boston. Imagine stepping ashore on an unfamiliar coastline, with no clear sense of what lay ahead, only the belief that whatever future you hoped for would begin here. Just a few years later, Boston's first meeting house rose near what is now State Street. Built in 1632, it was simple, practical, and central to daily life. Though the engraving we see today was created much later, it likely reflects the building's original appearance. This was where the town gathered, religious life, civic decisions, and community identity all unfolding within its walls. Remarkably, the heart of the modern city still aligns closely with these earliest foundations. As we move closer to the 18th century, scenes like this help ground us in what Boston once was, a small, uncertain colonial town. Wooden buildings line muddy roads. Ships rest close to shore. Life moves slowly, carefully. Boston was not yet a city. It was an experiment, still finding its footing in a new world. Looking back now, it's hard not to see these moments as the earliest roots of what would later be called the American dream. By the early 1720s, Boston had begun to change. This harbor view shows a town already recognizable today. The waterfront is crowded with ships fueling an Atlantic economy that connected Europe, the Caribbean, and the colonies. Boston was no longer fragile. It was growing, its harbors, streets, and skyline forming patterns that still shape the city. Extending into the water is Long Wharf, one of Boston's most important gateways to the Atlantic world. Ships arrived here carrying goods, people, and ideas. For many, this was their first step onto American soil. Behind it, church steeples rise above the town, including Christ Church in the North End, known today as the Old North Church, which still stands. At the entrance to the harbor stood Boston Light, completed in 1716 on Little Brewster Island. It was the first lighthouse built in what would become the United States. For sailors crossing the Atlantic, this light often marked the end of a long, uncertain journey. Though destroyed during the British evacuation in 1776, it was rebuilt in 1783 and still guides vessels into the harbor today. Nearby stood Castle William on Castle Island, the main fort guarding Boston Harbor. Its guns reminded all who entered that Boston was not just a place of opportunity, but a town firmly under imperial control. Crossing the river into Cambridge, we find Harvard College, small, modest, and already influential. Long before it became a global university, Harvard trained clergy and civic leaders for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Of its early buildings, only Massachusetts Hall, completed in 1720, still stands today. At the time, this place likely felt ordinary. Few walking these grounds could have imagined the influence it would one day hold. Back in Boston, the old State House stood at the center of civic life. From its balcony, laws were proclaimed, taxes enforced, and royal authority asserted. Crowds gathered below, listening, sometimes agreeing, sometimes growing restless. The building still stands today, quietly surrounded by modern towers, one of the last physical witnesses to the city's colonial power. Nearby, Boston Common served as shared ground, used for grazing animals, public gatherings, and military drills. British soldiers trained here within sight of townspeople going about their daily lives. In the background stood the Province House, home of the royal governors, overlooking the Common as a constant symbol of authority. By the late 1760s, tension had become part of everyday life. And in December 1773, it finally boiled over. Colonists boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped chests of tea into the water, protesting British taxation. Some disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, not for spectacle, but to conceal identity and make a statement. At the time, it wasn't called the Boston Tea Party. It was a calculated act of resistance, quiet, deliberate, and irreversible. Much of that resistance took shape in places like the Green Dragon Tavern. More than a tavern, it was an informal headquarters where merchants, craftsmen, and political organizers gathered. Groups such as the Sons of Liberty met here, debating policy, sharing intelligence, and planning responses. The revolution didn't begin with declarations. It began with conversations. At Faneuil Hall, those conversations moved into the open. By 1775, the building had become the city's central forum for debate. Crowds packed the hall, arguing over taxes, representation, and British authority. This was where frustration turned into action, where a city wrestled with what it was about to become. A few years later, those same streets told a different story. In 1789, a triumphal arch was erected to welcome George Washington as president of a newly independent nation. The arch was temporary, but its meaning was permanent. The struggle had led somewhere. The colonies were no longer becoming something. They had become something. Standing quietly through all of this was Christ Church, the Old North Church. Built in 1723, it had been an ordinary Anglican church long before it became part of legend. From its tower came a simple signal, 2 lanterns warning that British troops were moving by sea. A routine place of worship suddenly became part of history. Now we return to the present. The sites we've seen still exist, some nearly unchanged, others buried beneath layers of time. Boston's first meeting house is gone, but State Street remains crowded and alive. The harbor has been filled and reshaped, yet it remains the city's heart. Boston Light still stands watch. Castle William's walls still face the sea. Harvard's Massachusetts Hall still endures. The Old State House, Boston Common, Faneuil Hall, and the Old North Church all remain, anchors of memory in a modern city. These places remind us that history doesn't vanish. It stays, beneath our feet, behind familiar facades, waiting to be noticed. Thanks for being here, and for stepping into the past with me. If you have ideas for future cities or moments in history, feel free to share them in the comments. Until next time.